This is a Pioneer SX424 that I just replaced the filter capacitors, stereo indicator light, the dial lights, all of the capacitors on the amplifier, preamp, power supply, and phono section, as well as all of the faulty known bad transistors that are in the unit. We also cleaned it up, we polished the knobs, polished the face, did all that stuff. If you want to see how I do it, just keep watching. And if there's a specific part of the video that you want to see, you can also use the chapters that I've included in the description, or just they should show up in the timeline of the video as well. Presently, it just has really crackly knobs and switches, but it seems like it works perfectly fine. And so I have it plugged into a dim bulb tester. So we'll go ahead and turn it on. First, we gotta turn the dim bulb tester on. And then as we can see, we get lights, but they're very dim. And very crackly. As you can tell, lots of crackle going on. That scared me. If we turn it on to the radio, you can see all of our lights work. We just have some dial lights that are out. We'll go ahead and make sure we get sound out of it. And we do get sound. The left side is just quieter than the right side, but likely because of just this pot being really crackly and nasty. So I like to start with the more basic fixes first. I think that makes the most sense, because then you get a good idea of what's going on with the receiver. And then basically once we know it works, and once we get it all the knobs cleaned up and everything, we'll test all the inputs and functions and just make sure that they all function. And then we'll dive into the actual, more in-depth repairs. I love a good cable tie on a power cord, and the way that I like to do it is to just slap this cable tie on right near the base, and then you can just fold the wire up. And you want the power plug to be like fairly tight in there, and then basically on these extra power, the plugins, you can just, that's a better way. And now it's off the ground, it's not floating around too much. I think this receiver was sitting in someone's shop for a while. This is kind of a bottom of the line, like great beginner receiver if you're getting into hi-fi and stuff. The only downside to it is that it has these weird speaker plugs where you just need basically like a power plug, but with one of the sockets turned sideways to plug into it. You can also just kind of twist your wire into a spade shape and then just shove it in there. That works actually perfectly fine. You can also replace these if you want with newer binding posts and stuff, but I'm not going to be doing that. As you can see, the back of the case here got smashed at some point. Just pull off all these knobs, which are also all going to get cleaned and polished. Set those back there for now. This volume knob is a 2-piece, and it's really common for the outside piece to get loose and come off really easily over time, and so it's pretty often that those get lost. And something that you might notice is the little stars on here, those little washers. You want to make sure that they stay with the screws, because it's really easy for them to just get stuck in the wood of this wood case, and then you'll just lose them. And definitely feel free to leave a comment and be like, hey, why'd you do that way, or whatever. Tell me I'm stupid, because I know what I'm doing to a certain extent, but I'm not by any means an expert. I wouldn't consider myself an expert, at least. I would consider myself a student. So if you have something for me to learn, tell me what that is. Somebody stripped out the screws. There we go. Love it. All right, so with those two screws out, the only thing we have left are these two washers, and I'm actually super excited. I just got these new rocket sockets, they're called, from Stompbox Parts. They're really phenomenal because they're basically just a little plastic socket that you can stick onto the washer, and in that way, since they're plastic, you don't have to worry about scratching up the face of the receiver. Use the 12, and look at that. It makes it so easy to get these things off, and you don't have to worry about scratching the face. It's just really the best. So speakers, treble, and the selector switch. Alrighty, so this should just slide off, and that is messy. There's also 3 washers over the top of the nut that holds that potentiometer in place. So I'm just gonna go ahead and take a photo so that I know where those go. And I would recommend you do the same thing. We're gonna replace lamps in this real quick, just because we're here already and we have the faceplate off. And so there's these pins that should come out pretty easily. They're supposed to. basically you can push them from the back side, and there's 5 pins, and then we'll need to remove these few screws down here that hold this plate in place. Some of these tend to get stuck and be quite a pain to remove. Boop. Just like that. You just want to be careful to not scuff up this black faceplate or the dial plate, because it shows fingerprints and stuff really easily. This paint pen cap is actually going to probably be perfect because it has a little divot in the center. You just want to be careful of the dial string, but woo! Yeah, so any sort of cap, I think this is what I used last time, just because it has that divot in the center that makes it easy, but look at that. I think, yeah, the end of a Sharpie is probably the perfect size. And just like that, worked it out. We also have to pull off these few screws. So now this little plate should just come right out like that. This piece, you're gonna want to, it's held in still by this side piece, but that's kind of a pain to get out. And so this blue window here actually sticks out. So you have to simultaneously pull that out and slide it. And then you just want to be really careful of this black face and not let that drag along it too much. But now you can see all the lamps in here. And we've even got a little dead spider in there. Got in there, probably got turned on, and little dead spider. We're gonna replace all of them, and then we'll have to replace this. This one is separate, it's on the back side, but at least for these forward facing ones, we're gonna switch all of them to LED. And so I use these just curved tweezers to pull these lamps out. Yeah, some cool blue lamps that are LED. And we need 6 lamps for this. I should have 6 of them. So. Oh, and my bad, there's actually 5 in here, not 6. And then with these LEDs, they're directional, and so we just want to make sure that those LEDs are actually facing forward, straight forward, not at an angle. All right, so we got those 5 lamps replaced, and then we've got this one over here, which you just basically go through this hole. It's right here, I don't know how well you can see this, but there's a lamp right inside there, and it works, it's fine, but we're gonna switch it out because it doesn't match all the other ones. And you just push it down, and then you can just grab it out. This is where tweezers really come in handy, but you can just pull it straight out, and it's actually easiest, I believe, to just, if you want to flip it over, because it's upside down in there, it's easiest to just put it in like this, so that you're not fighting gravity. And once again, these are directional, and so you're gonna want the LEDs to be facing forwards. So we'll just... All right, so I remembered what I did last time was I just wrapped some of that double-sided tape around the tips of the tweezers, and then I just carefully slotted it down in, and I got the back side. Basically, I held it towards the back side of the bulb, kind of like this, and then just pushed the back end in, and then you're able to just push the front end in with these tweezers. I did end up taking the cover off so that I could work through this corner right here, through that hole. I feel like that made it a little bit easier. So we're gonna remove the bottom of the receiver so that we can clean these controls that roll correctly. Oh boy. This one has a lot of glue. Yeah, you can see like it's just very crusty looking. That just usually means there's a lot of heat, but this can also be just adhesive that's gotten on there. So we'll make sure we do our best to clean that off. These old adhesives and stuff that they used to like cover the board or cover certain connections or whatever, they'll just get corrosive over time. And while we're back here, I'm also just gonna go ahead and dust off the back of the receiver. And then we're gonna take some deoxit D100 And I just use the backside of my aux cable, and we're just going to clean all of these inputs. Just put a little D100 on it, and D100 on the outside, and then plug in, spin around. All right, those are all nice and clean. Make sure this ground connection has, we'll unscrew the threads and then just thread it back in, just to make sure it has a really good ground connection, because it's just screwed in there and those threads can get corroded over time. Oh, and then actually we're going to want to put some in the speaker terminals. Alright, so this selector switch, I like to just blast these out with electronics cleaner first, which is quick drying, and that'll just help clean anything out. And since it's open, we can actually just put D100L in there, but we want to make sure we let the electronics cleaner dry first. And you want to use this in a well-ventilated area. I'm going to open a window. I like to not get lead poisoning and other such, so I wear gloves when I'm soldering. I'm working with fiberglass because I don't like glass fibers in my fingers. And I try not to breathe in too many chemicals, because there's no reason to do that. If you want to do it, go for it, but there's no real reason for it. So, all right, and then you can see there's a few different contacts here. Oh, my cat's meowing outside. I don't know if you can hear that, but we're just gonna put a little D100L on those contacts. All right, now let's do that to the power switch here real quick. These units do also, they're kind of known for having issues with this power switch. This one works perfectly fine, so we're not going to touch it, but we want to take a knob off. And we just, for the speaker contacts in there, you can see there's just a few spots right in there where we want to put some deoxit. So we'll just put a little bit. I'm not going to worry about cleaning this one first, just because there's so few contacts, we can easily get the deoxit in there. All right, so we have those two switches cleaned, and if you look in here, you can see the few round controls in there. Those are going to be basically impossible to clean until we start recapping this and we actually pull that board out. But if you look to the left, where there's those more square items, right there. Working. Not trying to block your view here, just got a big head. As long as you don't let the full weight sit on it, it's not going to be the end of the world. So we're just going to put a couple drops of D100 down into these switches. Love it. Just doing a quick once over. I don't see any capacitors that are overly bad in here, but there's definitely some that look like they're bulging a little bit. All right, so as you can see, it's still pretty dirty back here, so I have a magic eraser, and I like to just use this to clean, basically cleaning the tops of all the stuff that's just hanging out back here. Nobody ever sees, so nobody ever cleans. I always enjoy trying to make them look as new while still maintaining some age characteristics. I want them to look cared for, especially if I'm going to sell them. Like this one's going to be for sale. These speaker terminals are nasty. It looks like somebody had tape over them at some point. Somebody did not want you to use this speakers too, or maybe their grandkids or whoever, you know. This thing has been around to a few homes, I would imagine, in 50 years. Obviously, you're not getting a brand new unit, but if it looks newer, that's better. I mean, I would want to receive something that's been cleaned, so I feel like someone else would want to receive that as well. It just makes the piece feel better. Cleaning is complete. Got some dust just on the transformer here, some cobwebs. This air gap capacitor for the radio, this beautiful device here that spins, desperately needs to be cleaned as well. Oh, love it. Blast it with a little air to help it move faster. All right, this is our moment of truth. We've got it all plugged back in, and we've got the volume turned down, we've got power off, turn our dim bulb on, and boom, we've got bright blue lights. Love to see it. And if we go to radio, we get our dial pointer and we get our signal meter. And they're back off. Awesome. So this is aux. Let's see how she sounds. Still a little crackly there on the volume knob, but we didn't actually clean it, so that's fine. This one, however, this was incredibly crackly. Now we get nothing. Same here. That's what we want. Let's check our buttons. That's our loudness switch. That's tape monitor. And that's our mode switch. All right, so those all work great. Volume is great. Let's check our stereo indicator. Let's see, so we want FM auto, and then we're just gonna check, see if our tuning meter works. We can see some signal coming in there, but we're gonna wanna be more over here because there's a pretty strong station. I might have to just touch the radio does work though, now we know. And then tape monitor. And we get signal through the tape. And we don't get any crackle, which is good. Nice. Even the volume knob barely has any crackle. All right, so an easy way to test the phono section that, you know, some people may or may not agree with this, but you can turn your phone down to the lowest possible volume, and then just plug it into the phono section. And you can hear it, and there's no distortion, and that's what's mostly important. It does have obviously the Phono EQ on it, so a huge bass boost and a bunch of treble cut off, it sounds like. So we'll go ahead and button some of this back up before we get to work on the capacitors and whatnot. All right, so to put this back in, I just dusted it and kind of cleaned it up a little bit, just like that, and then just lined up with over here. So then we can just toss all those little annoying clips back in. I'm just gonna clean up this board as best as I can. It's pretty dang crusty, and I'd much rather just start off by cleaning it as much as I can. Cue a time lapse. So this tool that I'm using now is a nylon spudger, so it can't really damage the circuit board, which is why I'm using it to scrape here. Scrape this adhesive off. The rubbing alcohol on the Q-tip doesn't fit into these smaller spaces, so you still want to be really careful with this, not to like scrape too hard on the board or... Alright, so between the plastic spudger and the rubbing alcohol, we got this board cleaned up most of the way, so I'm pretty happy with that. So the next thing we need to do is pull out these washers. And then we've got to pull these two screws. Then we've got to undo this little cable tie over here. So we've got to remove this bracket and then these two wiring harnesses and then the 4 screws that hold the heatsink in place. Those screws will just stay in their brackets. All right, so now we can push this back and out slowly and carefully, figuring out where all the wires go. And then you have to remove a few wires, yeah, from here. There's just these clips on the side that just, the wires just slide right in and out of. And we want to make sure that all the ones that are connected to this board get pulled out of these clips so that we've got enough length. Like these red wires right here need to come out of this side. And yellow wire, this is for our lamp, for the stereo indicator, it looks like. Fairly certain that's going to need to come out. And we should just be able to push it and give it enough slack so that we can get it out of here. What are we hung up on? Gotta take some more wires out of here. And if you're taking out a lot of wires like this, it doesn't hurt to get a photo. I already got a photo of this board, so. All right, so I just pulled a couple wires out of this clip over here that seemed like they were causing a little holdup. It's just a matter of millimeters, and you're gonna have to kind of force it, but you just want to make sure that when you're forcing it, it's not gonna break anything. And just like that. So tonight, I am gonna have time to do a few tasks. We have 4 emitter resistors, which are 2 watt, half ohm, 5% tolerance. We have our new filter capacitor, which is this. This one's the same size, diameter. It's maybe a little bit smaller diameter, but barely. It's just a little shorter, which means it'll fit in this clamp still from the factory. And then we've got these 2 1000 microfarad capacitors, which are the coupling capacitors that you see in here, the really big ones. And those are just going to be the easiest to replace, and so I'm just going to replace them really fast. We'll start with those, and then probably go to the emitter resistors, because those are kind of a pain. It actually really helps to have like a small mirror, and I don't have a small mirror, and I keep forgetting to buy one. So we got our soldering iron set to 800 degrees Fahrenheit. I'm just going to go on the back side and just wiggle this capacitor, see where it looks like it's at. Looks like it's right there. And we're correct. And basically what I do is just heat up one side, heat up the other side, and just kind of wobble it up and down. And as you can see, you always want to pull this out and then see that negative goes up for this, and then double check the voltage and everything. That's 1000 microfarad, 25 volts. We're replacing them with the much smaller Nichicon UPW 1000 microfarad, 35 volts. So slight increase in the voltage, same capacitance is what you want. And then since there are markings on the board that'll show you, positive or negative or whatever, but you never want to trust those. You just pulled that capacitor from right here. So what I'm going to do is just clean all that solder off, and there's lots of different ways you can do this. I use solder wick because I have it, and I'm going to eventually get a solder sucker, but basically you just heat it up, run it over it, and we're going to strip all that old solder off. Once again, you always want to solder with good ventilation, and don't hold your soldering iron on the pads for too long. That's a great way to damage them. So it's going to get a little loud here, but remove all that old solder. And now these holes are clean and good to go. You generally always want to bend these leads as well, so you're going to grab the lead, bend it down, and just for ease of cutting, I like to kind of stick the long part up still, and then we'll squeeze that lead in as long as we can. All right, and you just want to have those cut. You don't want to have leads that are too long. Basically, you want to just keep it on there long enough for that solder to pool up and to really form around the lead. And once that's happened, then you're done. And I will usually clean off the connections with some more rubbing alcohol and stuff, just to remove any contaminants like that glue that was left on the board. You can see some of it pooled up around this connection here. So I like to just clean each connection off, but I'll usually do like a few at a time or something like that, or come back over the whole board towards the end. Without further ado, I'm gonna replace a few more things. One other thing to add is that if the leads are a little narrow, what you can do, something I use is just tweezers, and you bend one lead over and then you bend it up so that you're not actually applying undue pressure to the capacitor. And I did this on the other one just off camera, but then that way you're not applying pressure to these leads to separate out of this capacitor. You're actually, the leads are wide enough, because these capacitors are smaller than the old ones. All right, so this is a much trickier install, but what we're going to be doing here is changing out these emitter resistors, which are on this contact to that contact, and then there's another one up here, and then there's 2 more down here. And they tend to just drift over time, so we're going to replace them. But this is where having a mirror can be really nice, and I'll show you why in a second. So we're going to just use tweezers. We'll pull one out at a time. Make sure we get the leads correct. Look at that. So this is what they look like. They're these big fat resistors, and our new resistors are wire wound. They're a little smaller. It's good to replace them, but just to prove my point here, so it's supposed to be half an ohm, getting about 0.8 ohms. So significantly more. I mean, what is that, a 60% drift or something from the original spec. And I pulled some out of the first one of these that I worked on that were 1.1 ohms, so more than double their actual resistance. So this is the part where having a mirror is really handy, because you have to put these resistors in from the backside, and they are kind of a pain to put in. You basically just have to cut these leads a little shorter, but still leave extra. You want to be able to bend them over. But then you just have to kind of fish around back here and hope that you can get them in. What was really helpful is to line up your holes first, just to make sure your leads are both as wide as they need to be from the backside.
So you can see I basically just used tweezers to stick it in from the backside, and then I grabbed one of the leads, and then I used the tweezers to stick the other lead in, then I snipped the leads off, and then I soldered it in place.
And now we repeat that process for 3 more. Alright, so I just got the 3rd one in, which this is one of the tricky ones. Now I have the last tricky one up here. Probably going to be a pain in the butt just like this, but just a pro tip that I experienced both times, and I forgot about this until now. It's really easiest to do this with 2 pairs of tweezers. So that one was way easier than I thought it would be. We got all 4 emitters changed. It's getting kind of late, but I think I still have time to do our main filter capacitor. All right, so we've got to take this filter capacitor out, which means we got to remove this screw, and then we're gonna have to take this screw off, or this screw with the nut on it out as well. If you don't loosen it all the way, it just makes it a little bit easier, because then you can just slide it easily onto the new bracket. And as you can tell, it fits basically perfectly. Kind of match where you see the dimples on here from the bracket. And then the other thing that you're going to want to check is which side is negative. And so with this, it was sitting up, it was sitting right there. Negative is facing that direction. So you want to take a look at your capacitor and go, oh, that's negative. So we want negative to be basically just a little bit over from where the bracket is, and then we'll just go ahead and tighten this down. Once you have taken a photo of the wiring that's on the backside of your filter capacitor, you're going to want to have your, you're going to need to unsolder this, but then you can also use your tweezers to kind of just unwind the wires that are on here, because 3 of them, at least on my unit, they're just wrapped brittle over time, and they have a tendency to snap off, so spin it carefully. And then for the last couple of wraps, you can just slide it off once it's loose. And it's not the end of the world if you break the wire, because there's a little bit extra, and you're probably not going to break off the entire thing. We'll try desoldering this white one first. Gotta be careful with your soldering iron. It is maybe a little bit too late for me to be working on stereos. I don't like working on stuff too late into the night because I get tired and I do dumb things. Right. This filter capacitor is probably fine. There was definitely some hum that I was hearing from this receiver. I'm hoping that, you know, just replacing all these new capacitors and stuff, I'm not really hoping, I know that it should make it significantly better. So the unfortunate thing about this capacitor though, is that these posts are shorter. And because of that, I'm not gonna be able to wrap as much wire, but you can still wrap enough wire, and you might just have to wrap it. Oh, it just snapped off. What I'll do is put this white wire on over the top, and then just solder that in place on top of the black wire. So we're just gonna solder both wires. Oops. Well, should have known better. That allowed the wire to just fall off. All right, got my support in here. Now we'll put these wires on. Alrighty, got a new filter capacitor in there. Make sure that these wires, just looking at them, they look good. So the next thing that you need to do is just slide it back into this side. And then just keep it out enough so that that screw hole lines up on this side. Alright, good morning everyone. I did a couple things off camera. I just re-screwed these two grounding plugs back into the chassis, and then I made sure that none of the contacts for the emitter resistors were linked to other contacts. I noticed that there was a little bit of solder maybe connecting two contacts that shouldn't be contacted. And then what I'm going to do now is actually turn this on. I have it on my dim bulb tester. You can see this light bulb right over here. Make sure it's off, and we're going to turn it on and just see if it works. Great. No bright light on the dim bulb, so that means that we're all set. The rest of this board we're basically just going to do in one go. Generally speaking, you would typically only want to do like maybe 10 components at a time, especially if you're just starting out. Even every couple of components tested on the dim bulb tester, but you just want to make sure that you don't have any wires touching that shouldn't be touching or anything like that before you turn it on the dim bulb. What you need to know about this board that we're going to work on is a couple things. The first one being that there are a bunch of different sections on this board. So we have the preamp section, the power supply is actually this section up here, and then the main amplifier section is towards the back and kind of in the center, and then the phono section is at the bottom, and it's underneath a metal cover very similar to the one that is on these switches here, and that metal cover will have to come off in order to work on it. So we will go ahead, but we're going to start with the power supply. So that's just all these capacitors up here. Let's get to replacing. I'm very excited. It's always fun to dive into a new one and start replacing stuff. So I'm here working on the power supply, and I found this capacitor that has kind of obvious heat damage from the transistor that it's next to, and then it's bulging on the bottom, and it has lots of that corrosive glue just kind of all over it. And that's why we recap these old receivers, because even if the caps like test mostly fine, they're still worse than a new cap. So the capacitor that I just pulled out in this back corner was not only bulging, but it was leaking a little bit. And so what I'm doing is just cleaning it with rubbing alcohol. You can see all that stuff that's coming off there. It was really bad. All right, and just like that, we are moving into the preamp of this receiver. With this small 3.3 microfarad 50 volt capacitor. There's a few more of them in here. For the capacitors that are preamp and power supply, I'm just using Nichicon UPW capacitors. Since this isn't a super high-end receiver, I'm not too worried about getting like the right capacitors in there. The only disagreement to that or whatever that I have is for the capacitors that are 1 microfarad. There's a few in the phono stage and then 2 in the preamp. I am replacing them with WiMA film capacitors. Basically anything 3.3 microfarad and below. Some people will say 1 microfarad and below use the film caps. I'm using Nichicon UKL capacitors for the 3.3 microfarad, which are just a low leakage equivalent. All right, so we've got the we've got the preamp and the amp done, recapped. Now, the only thing that we need to do is the phono stage, which is where we have to take out this screw. So you pull this screw right here, and then you can just use a little pair of pliers or something, and all you need to do is just there's two little tabs, metal tabs that hold the cover in. You can just bend those down so that they're flush with there's a little gap that they have to slide through. And you can see in here, there's the metal cover. You just pull it out this way. So that just goes over your Phono section. And just to make the install a little easier, I'm just going to bend these tabs flat. A few capacitors and then some transistors that we're going to change out. Because the Phono stage is where there should be 4 known bad transistors in there. They're 2SC1312s, which is interesting. This must be either an earlier or a later production run model, or somebody came in here and replaced all those transistors at some point. But all right, so it turns out that I just had never seen the 1312s in here before, but they're part of the same series as the 1318. There's the 1313 and 14 and a couple other in the series also, and they need to be replaced. So I do have the replacements for them, and they have the same corroded lead problem where basically the leads on the transistors turn black and they get corroded, and eventually that works its way up inside the casing. First, we're just going to be recapping the Phono stage, which has, I believe, 7 capacitors in it. I really wish I could give you guys a better view of this because but it's just very, very crowded in here. We feel the pain of a lifetime lost in 1,000 days. Alright, I took a quick lunch break and now I'm back working on this. And something that I was thinking about is for this Phono section, it's a real big pain to get in here and actually remove a lot of the components in here, especially the transistors. Getting them in and out, it's just a huge pain. And so I was thinking about it and I was like, why don't I just remove some wires over here to make it so that the board can pull up further. And I was looking at it and it looks like I'm only gonna have to remove 2 wires. Oh wait, that's the wrong one. Huh. I'm typically like, oh, less disassembly is better, but oh my gosh, yeah, that's gonna be huge. Look at that. Look at how far we can turn it now. Oh, this is gonna make it so much easier to work on this board. Yeah, so would I recommend removing those 4 wires? Most certainly. You should 100% do that if you're gonna work on this bad boy. I was thinking about this on my lunch break, like, man, those last few capacitors are really being a pain to remove. I wonder if there's a better way to do that. And then they're it, because that's why you gotta step away from a project. I was getting a little irritated, so that's why it's good to step away when you get irritated. Alright, so replacing these 4 transistors in here that are on the Phono section should be pretty easy now that we have this board lifted up. It was a real pain when the board was down, the last one of these I worked on, because they have the 3 legs and you have to match each leg to where it needs to go. Yeah, it's a big pain. So I have 4 fairly closely matched replacement transistors here. Alright, now it's time to button this back up. Just gotta reconnect those 4 wires. Alright, so I did forget to actually clean these potentiometers, which is kind of unfortunate. While that board was up, it would have been a little easier, but we'll just go ahead and do it here. Those should all be plenty clean now and plenty lubed up. Alright, just throwing our few washers and nuts back onto these 4 controls. I'm fairly confident that this'll work. I double checked all of the work to make sure that it was done right, but there is the chance that I turn it on and something blows up, so that's always fun. Just gonna route these cables, and then we need to get this bracket back in. I really need to get a magnetizer for the screwdriver. It is not good. All right, and then we'll toss our little cable tie back on this menagerie of wires. We'll throw the bottom cover on just for ease of use. Make sure you get all the wires tucked in nicely as well. I'm looking forward to getting this one done because I actually have a bunch of other higher end receivers that I'm really excited to start working on. Volume all the way down. Switch off. Speakers plugged in. Let's give her a rep, folks. Let's see if we can get some radio going.
So that it rises.
There we go. Got some AM radio. Woo! Also, there's no hiss. There was a bit of a hiss before when you turn it up. It was actually fairly loud, surprisingly, and that hiss seems to be gone. All right, also another learning experience here. You can just push this back, the tuning string back, and then you can lift this off. So then when it comes time to actually take this front faceplate off, it comes off significantly easier. This lamp, it pulls forward out of the housing, so I did need to take that cover off. I am just gonna be replacing it with this incandescent bulb, and the way we're gonna do that is we're just gonna splice the wires in. All right, so I just used a razor blade to trim the sheath off of these wires, and then our new bulb just has a stripped wire already, 10 wire. So I wasn't sure if the incandescent bulbs had polarity, and so I Googled it, and they don't have polarity. So I took the bottom cover off to check to see which was the negative wire and which was the positive wire for that. And it's a good thing I took the bottom cover off because this ground wire that goes from this amp board actually broke off at the base of the plug, the base of the winding. It's another wire that's just wound around a post on here. It was loose, but it was still making contact. So when I was moving the board around, I must have broken it off. So I'm really glad I noticed that, because otherwise it might not have been something I noticed until it got, like the amp might have worked fine until it got like shipped to somebody or something, and then it would have not worked fine. We do have all the stuff to do some soldering around here, so. Awesome. I was thinking about it, and I was like, man, if I was looking for the problem, that could have been super annoying to find, but finding it on accident, now that's convenient. Because the lamp can only go in this way, I had to put the lamp in first and then put the heat shrink tubing on each wire and then solder the wires together, and then now I can put the heat shrink, actually shrink the heat shrink tubing. All right, all of our lamps are working. We are gonna see if, let's see, what do we want FM auto. Okay, let's see if amp, the stereo indicator light's working. Nice. Love it. So good, dude. The stereo indicator light is not bright enough because it's not an LED. And I do have a red LED I could put in there that would make it nicer. Turn it on. Look at how much brighter that is. It matches how bright these LEDs are. You could barely see it before the incandescent, so much better to have an LED in there. All right, and the next thing we're gonna do is just put this back on. This should be held in place by your 3 small black screws. All right, we're just gonna wash off this faceplate. I just use a magic eraser personally and some warm water. You could remove the wood sides off of this if you want, but it's really not the end of the world if they get a little wet. And generally, magic erasers are pretty fine for the font, the screen printing on here. They don't rub it off. I've never had issues with it, but that's not probably always going to be the case. Like, you just want to be careful. The knobs are the biggest pain though. I just use a magic eraser and just kind of spin them on there, and it tends to cleans the front really well. And then the sides are basically just always a pain, all the little grooves on these, but you can just run it up and down and it generally cleans it pretty well. the wood got a little wet on the sides of the faceplate, so, and regardless, you just want to give it a nice little bit of, get a bit of wax on there, get it sealed up looking nice. So that is what we're gonna do. And that's a little something for the wood. Now we've got a little something for the metal. We've got some Mother's Mag and aluminum polish. Just put a little bit of this on a paper towel. And mostly what we're gonna wanna polish is the fronts of these knobs. So you can just set them down, spin it around a little bit. I know some of you might hate that I'm wearing gloves, so I'm just wearing gloves because it makes it easier to not mix all these things that I'm using, chemicals to polish things and wax things and whatnot. And it means that I don't have to waste time washing my hands in between every single one. I can just take a glove off. But if you've got a problem with me wearing gloves, feel free to let me know in the comments below, as some of you have. Putting the finishing touches on something is always the most tedious part because it's like it's fixed already. It's good, but I need to then make it pretty. Making it pretty seems like it takes just as much work as making it work, so. Put our 3 washers on our 3 posts, so we need 3 on here, and we need 3 on here, and 3 on here. So that's treble, power switch, and then input selector switch. I want to make sure that the nuts on these selector switches and all the switches are fairly snug. Nice. All right, that one's cranked down. We're getting as cranked as they can be. All right. Man, she is coming along, looking good. This series of receivers looks really nice, and the fact that the wood is cut at the exact same width and height and everything as the faceplate, it just shows the manufacturing quality to me. Clean, clean, clean. All right, so we just have to throw a couple screws in, and then I'm gonna have to take this to my wood shop tomorrow to fix that wood case that we talked about at the beginning that has a cracked back corner. Whoo! That is pretty. We got the really bright stereo light. That's a beautiful unit. Also, I thought I would clarify, normally this would be the time where we would do some adjustments, like check the DC offset and the bias, but this does not actually have DC offset because it's a capacitor coupled amplifier, so there's no adjustment there, and the bias is not adjustable on this unit. We could replace a couple resistors with some trimmer pots and then have it, but it tests fine. That bad boy right there is cracked. As you can see, it got dropped. And so, as you can also see right here, got a little glue, and we're just gonna put it on a little X-Acto knife, and we're just gonna slide it in there, real clean like. You're gonna see me time lapse here in a second. Watch me time lapse. So, it's the next day. We'll turn this light on here. Lovely. All right, so let this sit overnight, clamped in. We're gonna go ahead and remove the clamps now. It should be dry. And we'll see how it's looking. It's already looking better. All right. Just damage a few things in the process. And just like that, this whole corner used to be pretty smushed in and now nice and secure. Perfect. So we'll go ahead and put it on. and do some testing to this before I list it for sale, but this concludes our Pioneer SX424 servicing. Thanks so much for watching. If you have any tips on things I can do better or things I can do differently, definitely feel free to leave them in the comments, because I'm here to learn and grow, just like probably you are, I assume. But anyways, have a good one.